In this video, I'll review how, as a supplier of wood elements, you can build a full parametric model, which, if any adjustments are added, is automatically updated according to dimensions and quantities. Disclaimer: dimensions, distances between timber, number of steel angle, etc. are indicative only and therefore cannot be expected to be correct. I will start by adding a few comments on the template file because I see very often that students are working in the template, and a template is not meant for working in the template. So what we do is that we save that to the disk, and then we browse the template file where we have saved it, and then we create a new project based on this template. So I save it to the disk and choose this template and start a new project. The template is not very different from what you have seen in the VIA template, for example. So elevations, instead of north, east, west, and south, is called back, front, left, and right. Floor plans is bottom element, top door, top element, etc. So nothing really new here. In this case, I'll start by renaming so that we can keep track on what is inside and what is outside on this element that we are creating now. And I have added a few objects to this template file. You see we have reference planes with a distance of 8 millimeter to the grid lines. You can adjust that if you want. I have added a reference plane, named it front element. And before you begin to create your own element, then you can adjust those levels that we have here if that will be necessary. And then we have a few reference plane indicating the middle of the element and both sides of a door. So I'll start by creating the first piece of timber here. So I'll place that on the work plane, bottom element. I can choose to lock the timber to the reference planes or to the grid lines. If I go to the outside elevation here, I can continue working still on a reference plane. Since it's saved and named, I can then work on that specific work plane. That makes it easy to create the rest of the element. So I'll start creating top and bottom here, and then I'll create the sides. As you can see, very easy to create. It will snap to the reference planes and to the existing geometry. And then, of course, remember, as one of the first steps will be to save this element that we're creating here, or this project. So now I have the frame, you can say, and I want to continue adding my damp-proof membrane, dampspær in Danish. So I copy the reference plane, and if I want to work on that specific work plane, I must remember to name that reference plane so I can work on it. So I'll go to the inside elevation view, and then I can add this damp-proof membrane, not on a face. I could choose to choose one of the face of my timber, but since I have made this reference plane, then I will use that as my working plane. I will then continue working on the insulation. Again, it's a line-based family. I place this on the bottom element, still on a work plane. If I go to the outside, you'll see that since it's placed on bottom element work plane, it starts at 0. I can offset the host to 45 millimeter. I can add the length the length of this bat insulation. I can copy this, so I keep track on how many pieces of soft insulation bats should I need in this project. That could be useful information later on. As you can see, I cannot snap to the top beam, but since I'm working in precise millimeters, I can adjust it so that I know that the last bat has the correct size. Then I can add steel angle brackets if that is necessary for the project. So again, on the architecture component, there is a steel angle in the library. Remember, you can rotate the steel angle by hitting spacebar on your keyboard until it fits. At some point, it will be difficult to keep track on the different components that we continue adding to the model. So it can be a good idea to split view, as I do it here. Under views, you can tile the views so that you see more than one view at the time. So now I will continue with a layer of again 45 by 45 millimeter battens. So I duplicate the wood timber. We can discuss if that might be the correct word of it. And I will begin to model this on that reference plane where I placed the damp-proof membrane before. So on that work plane, I can then continue adding those battens here. They're not supposed to be in where the door will be placed, so I create two small pieces of battens here on both sides of the door. I select those two battens and I want to array a number of battens with a distance between 450 millimeter in between. And I can adjust how many beams do I want to have, or battens, 6, 5, or 6. So 5 will be correct here because I want to have a new one going from side to side. So I'll keep those 5 arrays as I have it here, and then create a new 45 by 45 millimeter batten on the top of the door, and continue arraying that to the top. Then you'll see that when we come to the top here, that we actually need a few millimeters if this should be correct. I don't know what you would do here, but in this example, I'll say that that will be good enough. But in your project, will that be good enough if you, in this case, needs another 5 millimeter to keep 450 millimeter in between? Maybe it's not good enough. So the final step in this example that I give you here will be to add a 45 millimeter insulation in between those battens that we have here. So again, I go to bottom element as I did it when I created the 145 millimeter insulation, and I place it on a work plane. I model it, I draw it from A to B. As you can see, it's a bit too big here, so I select the insulation and then I can drag it, and of course remember to offset from host 45mm and then drag that so that it will fit perfectly in between those buttons. So for now, enough with the modeling. So now we will take out quantities of this element that we have made here. So I'll create a generic model schedule, but it will later on focus on the 45 by 195mm timber. As you might see in the schedule, when we create it, it will include every generic model that we have in this project. So I'll add a few parameter fields here to the schedule. So family type, length, and count. So to filter out what should not be included in this schedule, we need, as you can see here, when I try to filter, I can only filter on the length, and that is not relevant here. So I need to add another parameter field here, and I'll use the type comments field here and add 45 by 195mm to this field here. And if I then go and add that specific field to my schedule, it will then be possible for me to filter on that specific field. So now it's possible for me to filter on type comments, and it should equal that specific type that I have here, and that will then exclude the rest of my generic models. I can then delete family and type because now I have the dimension in the type column. And if we don't want to have a row for every piece of timber we have, we can then sort by length and uncheck itemize every instance. That will then give us the total number of the different lengths that we have in this project. So, and if I want to have a blank line in between every length here, I can add that. So that was something about modeling. That was something about taking out quantities of this specific element. So I will now focus on how to create that output drawing so that the craftsman in the production can create this element. So what I'll do is that I will take duplicates, I will copy all the different views that we have made here. So I'll keep the top part of the project browser as my work in progress views. Therefore, it's important to duplicate the different views that I would like to have on my production sheet or whatever we call it. So I'll duplicate the 3D view. I'll duplicate outside elevation, rename it. I'll duplicate floor plan, bottom element, and I'll need to adjust the view range so that we are not looking completely to the top of this element. And finally, I'll create a section through the door opening here. So before I begin to drag them to the sheet, I'll make sure that they look the way that I want to have them. So I'll start by adjusting the 3D view here. If you want to have the same or view the element from the same angle, you can press this corner of the view cube up here that will save, you can say, the same view angle on every 3D view. I'll adjust the crop, and I'll do that on all the other views that we have in this project. So I'll adjust the crop, I'll hide the crop, I'll select the objects that I don't want to see on that specific view. I know that the green reference planes will not be printed, but anyway, they are a bit annoying, so I'll hide them. You can select an object and press VH on the keyboard. That will hide the full category, and I'll do that with the grid lines as well. And on sections and elevation, I don't want to see the levels as well. So now all the views are nice and ready to be dragged to the sheet. I'll start by the elevation because that will be the primary one. That will be the facade, the elevation looking into this element. Next will be the section AA. As you can see, when I drag that around, there's a dashed blue line indicating that they will be placed correct according to each other. And that is, of course, important here, so that we're using the same scale. Everything will be the same here. And finally, I'll drag what we can call section BB. Again, there is this blue dashed line to keep track on that everything is placed beside and underneath each other. And finally, or not finally, because we need the schedule as well, but I'll drag the 3D view and then finally the schedule to complete my production sheet here. To help the workers in the production, I'll create one drawing for every step that we're going through in this process, creating this wood element. So the first drawing I will create will only include the framing of this element. So I'd like to filter out what is not important in the first step. So I'll create a filter. Under filters, I'll create a new filter, naming it step number 1. The filter should include the generic category, and it should look at the comments field. So every time in the comment fields step 1 equals, it should do something. So I'll create that actually does not equal. I'll explain that afterwards. And I'll then add this filter, and should not be visible what is not in step 1. So now you can see everything will disappear in my 3D view. But if I select those 45 by 195 millimeter timber, and I write step 1 in the comment fields, then it will include or exclude everything else that doesn't have this comments step 1 added. I also want to add the steel angle to step 1, so then they will appear in this view. So if we go back to the sheet, we'll now see that it will only show what is meant for the worker to do in step 1. And I will then add that same filter to the rest of the views on my sheet here. Another important filter I would like to add to this view here will be to make it very clear that we have those steel ankles. So I'll make them very, very thick and red. So I'll create a filter here and overwriting the projection lines with a red color. So as you can see, it's very, very clear on this drawing that the worker should add those steel ankles. So what I have created here will be step number 1. That indicates that I need to create all the other steps further on. So to have that same appearance of every production drawing that you create, maybe 4, 5, or 6 steps, then it's a good idea to create view templates so that you will have the same appearance on in every view. So you can reuse the setting that you have just done. So I'll create a new view template and that should include everything but filters. So if you uncheck filters, then you have the opportunity to adjust that individually on every view. As you can see here, when I go to visibility graphics, everything will be grayed out and not editable, but the filters will be editable. And then, of course, you need to add relevant dimensions. So on the sheet, I'll double click the view, and then you can add dimensions to the view. And remember, you can also create this zero-based dimension. So that is very, very easy for the workers to create this specific element. So instead of having indicating section CC, I rather rename that to elevation, because we have a rather small problem here, because as you might know, we cannot create sections on a floor plan. So we need to indicate that we actually section the element right here looking down. So I have created a few symbols that you can add and indicate that the bottom element is section BB. Yes, and then I'll just finish this video by adding a few other elements to this. For example, how many angle brackets do we have? It's a good idea, or it's relevant to duplicate an already existing schedule and then changing the filters and the sorting to have that appearance that you prefer. So instead of length, we'll just have count, and as you can see here, I need to add the type comments to the bracket, to the angle bracket. So I'll copy the text from the description field and add it to the type comments, because that was the one that we used in the 45 by 195. So I'll just change the filter to angle brackets, and that will then indicate that we have right now 4 steel ankles in the project, and I will add that schedule to the sheet as well. And if you don't like the headline type comments, you can just, in the schedule, you can select it and change the name of the column for whatever you like, and I'll do that with the timber schedule as well. So I double click it, and then I can just change the headlines to whatever I like. So I change it to dimension, and I'll delete the via thing. Then that should be perfect. Remember that when everything is set up correct as what we have done here, it is very, very easy to add elements to the project. And when we do that, everything, since it's a parametric model that we have here, every view will be updated, every schedule will be updated when we add geometry to this project. Another final comment should be that if you have a very complex element and you want to create somehow like an IKEA 3D view, remember you have the possibility to create displace or use the tool displace elements to create that that overview if that is necessary.